Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe right now to this channel. This is huge. MSNBC News, The Hill, Fox News. Absurd and extremely detrimental Eric Holder on Donald Trump's presidential immunity claims. Hold up. The Hill, Holder worried Supreme Court will come to detrimental conclusion on Trump immunity. The Supreme Court will uphold the rule of law and the Constitution. They have already, in my book, it's a done deal. They've already sided with Trump, at least on partial presidential immunity, which is all he needs. Hit subscribe to this channel. Also, this is Clarence Thomas questioning the legitimacy of the special counsel. Judge Cannon is looking at this in the classified documents case. This could be an even greater political victory than I could have ever imagined. Hit subscribe right now. This is the actual exchange between Justice Clarence Thomas and the special counsel lawyer before we get to everything else pertaining to immunity. Check it out, everybody.
Justice Thomas?
Mr. Sally.
I apologize. This is actually President Trump's lawyer and Justice Thomas. Justice Thomas asks, did you ever question the legitimacy of the special counsel? It was not, like Mueller wasn't, appointed by the Senate, which a special counsel must be appointed by the Senate. I believe Ken Starr was, but let's continue.
Justice Thomas?
Mr. Sally, in assessing the official acts of a president, do you differentiate between the president acting as president and the president acting as candidate?
Yes, we do, and we don't dispute, essentially, the blazing game discussion of that.
Okay.
But of course, that has to be done by objective determinations, not by looking at what was the purpose of what you did this. And that's the most important point there.
Did you, in this litigation, challenge the appointment of special counsel?
Not directly. We have done so in the Southern District of Florida case, and we totally agree with the analysis provided by Attorney General Meese and Attorney General Mukasey. And it points to a very important issue here, because one of their arguments is, of course, that we should have this presumption of regularity. That runs into the reality that we have here an extraordinary prosecutorial power being exercised by someone who was never nominated by the president or confirmed by the Senate at any time. So we agree with that position. We hadn't raised it yet in this case when this case went up on appeal.
Justice.
This is huge, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, you have former Attorney General Michael Mukasey, brilliant man. He really is. Edwin Meese, during Reagan's administration, also brilliant. These are two scholars of the Constitution. These were attorney generals when you didn't get contempt of Congress, an AG that was held in contempt of Congress like Eric Holder and Merrick Garland. But they both state that it is unconstitutional to have a special counsel, and we'll get to immunity. Trump will get presidential immunity. He's allowed to perform a speech, just like the absurd Colorado ban that was overturned unanimously. You might even get one or two liberal justices, could be 6-3, could be 5-4, it doesn't matter. He'll still get partial presidential immunity. He'll dissolve the special counsel immediately after he wins. But the point is, you have two former attorney generals, and to my super chat, thank you. You have, and to the people watching, members, thank you so very, very much. This is a done deal, ladies and gentlemen. You already have Eric Holder. You have all Democrats now livid. They know that the Supreme Court has essentially ruled for Trump yet again. First, it was the 9-0 unanimous Supreme Court decision. I told you what happened before it happened, overturning the Colorado ban. Then it's the immunity case, where he's given partial immunity, or more than that, but at least partial immunity, and I've been telling you that he will. And that should be by this coming Wednesday. They'll come out with it either Monday, Wednesday. They should have come out with it today, but But they've already decided on this, in my book. And then you get the Supreme Court will overturn an unconstitutional guilty verdict. Completely unconstitutional. Because a state cannot level a federal statute at anyone without the federal government involved. In this case, the Department of Justice and the Federal Election Commission dropped the case. But let's listen to this again, because if you have the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court justice asking, did you question the legitimacy of the special counsel? This is huge. Right now, the judge in Florida is looking at whether or not she should continue with potentially a completely unconstitutional special counsel.
Thomas?
Mr. Sally, in assessing the official acts of a president, do you differentiate between the president acting as president and the president acting as candidate?
Yes, we do, and we don't dispute, essentially, the blazing game discussion of that.
Okay.
But of course, that has to be done by objective determinations, not by looking at what was the purpose of what you did this. And that's the most important point there.
Did you, in this litigation, challenge the appointment of special counsel?
Not directly. We have done so in the Southern District of Florida case, and we totally agree with the analysis provided by Attorney General Meese and Attorney General Mukasey. And it points to a very important issue here, because one of their arguments is, of course, that, we should have this presumption of regularity. That runs into the reality that we have here an extraordinary prosecutorial power being exercised by someone who was never nominated by the president or confirmed by the Senate at any time. So we agree with that position. We hadn't raised it yet in this case when this case went up on appeal.
So now they're looking at even dismantling the special counsel. I'm not sure. The judge in Florida, who's a very good judge, by the way, which is why Democrats and media want to disparage her. See, they go after Trump for complaining about judges, and then all they do, whether it's Kavanaugh or Clarence Thomas or Alito or Judge Cannon in Florida, all they do is try to disparage, demean, besmirch judges that rule against their attempt at imprisoning Trump, okay, because it's unconstitutional. Well, let's go ahead really quickly. This is another former attorney general stating, they're not going to, Trump's going to get immunity. The special counsel will not imprison Trump. That's not going to happen. And by the way, he's not going, there's like a 2% chance or 5% chance he actually sees a jail cell, which is something that he would probably, if he ever did, his poll numbers will go through the roof, because the entire country would say, my God, what a double standard. You have laptop servers, you have blatant criminality, and they go after Trump for record-keeping misdemeanors that somehow they elevated to felonies. But if the Supreme Court rules to overturn the unconstitutional guilty verdict, they need to do it before July 11th. If they don't, they do it before November 5th. That's fine too. But I believe they want to jail Trump, which is why the Supreme Court needs to get involved. And I believe will get involved.
Next case, a new Fox poll shows an overwhelming majority of voters say the Trump conviction had no impact on their vote. 6% say they changed their vote because of it. Former acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker joins me now. Matthew, welcome back. Does that surprise you?
Good morning, Stuart. I don't think it surprises me because, I was up at the trial and saw it for what it was, and I think a lot of Americans saw it for exactly what it was, which was an over-aggressive, politicized process where the judge and the prosecutor were in collusion to jam through in a very blue jurisdiction the conviction of Donald Trump for kind of novel legal theories. And so I can imagine the American people just kind of let it roll off their backs. I mean, there's obviously more serious issues right now. We have a corporate tax cut that's going to expire in 2026. We have the 250th celebration of our country, but most importantly, we have kitchen table issues like inflation and crime that are obviously the front and center for most Americans.
A former Obama Attorney General, that will be Eric Holder, He's concerned over the coming decision on Trump's presidential immunity. Holder said this, and I'm quoting now: anything less than a decision by the Supreme Court that says a president should be held to the law just like any other American citizen should be, anything other than that is absurd.
This man was held in contempt of Congress for withholding documents, yet again, like Merrick Garland, from Congress, pertaining to a very controversial program during President Obama's years, okay, that did not work, that harmed national security. This man, Mr. Holder, was held in contempt of Congress. And then now he's talking about how nobody's above the law.
Matthew, straighten me out for a second, will you? What the Supreme Court will decide on is presidential immunity for official acts, putting limits on that immunity. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you've got that right. And if you listen to the arguments a couple months ago, what you heard, Stuart, was the court wrestling with kind of where to draw this line. Obviously, there's not a lot of precedent. All we have is the Nixon case regarding a civil matter that suggested that it was a very broad presidential immunity for official acts. But in this case, I'm worried that the left, because they're always tactical and there's no strategy,
like any other American, be held to the law. Anything less than a decision that says a president should be held to the law.
Let's go ahead really quickly. Holder, contempt of Congress, Politico. Okay, so Holder held in contempt of Congress. Eric Holder held in contempt of Congress. Okay. Now, what did Mr. Holder say about every American should be, as nobody's above the law, even the Trump is not above the law? Holder held in contempt of Congress, Politico. Oh, what's this? Judge declines to hold Holder in contempt. Okay. Nobody's above the law, huh? So he was held in contempt of Congress. The House has voted to hold Attorney General Eric Holder in contempt of Congress for his failure to turn over documents related to a very detrimental political scandal and harm national security. The first time Congress has taken such a dramatic move against a sitting cabinet official. So, okay. The court ruling affirms that Attorney General Holder broke the law. Okay, so hold on one second. Let's see here. The court ruling affirms that Attorney General Holder broke the law in withholding subpoena documents which led to the House of Representatives to vote him in criminal contempt. Okay. So there you go. He gets to break the law, but then pontificate about Trump breaking the law. And so he's voted, the House of Representatives voted to hold him in contempt of Congress. He did not give documents, just like Merrick Garland didn't give documents. Democrats withhold documents all the time. They bend the rules all the time. And he broke the law, and yet now he's pontificating, of course, about Trump breaking the law. Let's continue.
Just like any other American citizen should be. Anything other than that is absurd. Matthew, straighten me out for a second, will you? What the Supreme Court will decide on is presidential immunity for official acts, putting limits on that immunity. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you've got that right. And if you listen to the arguments a couple months ago, what you heard, Stuart, was the court wrestling with kind of where to draw this line. Obviously, there's not a lot of precedent. All we have is the Nixon case regarding a civil matter that suggested that it was a very broad presidential immunity for official acts. But in this case, I'm worried that the left, because they're always tactical and there's no strategy, they're going to draw a line or want a line drawn like Eric Holder does, which essentially makes every future president make decisions in a kind of in a space of thinking through what's going to happen next. Am I going to be prosecuted by the next administration for making a decision that is well within my constitutional duties? And so I think you're going to see the court much more thoughtful in the impact for future generations and not how it affects Donald Trump. And if it benefits Donald Trump in the near term, I don't think the court really cares about that, because they're thinking what happens for future presidency and how do we maintain the republic instead of what the left wants to do, which is always to tear down and attack Donald Trump.
If Trump were granted some level of immunity by the Supreme Court, what impact would that have on his trials and on the election?
Well, I mean, the short answer is it will delay most likely the D.C. matter, but I think what the court's probably going to do is send it back to Judge Chutkan in the district court in D.C. for her to decide which, in the indictment, which were official acts and which were non-official acts. And I think that is obviously going to take a lot of time, Stuart.
And then it would go back to the Supreme Court if they said a speech was an unofficial act. Okay, so none of this, their attempts at getting Trump will not work. None of it's going to work, and I told you, none of it's going to work. This is Alan Dershowitz. They're going to get some immunity, ladies and gentlemen, and that's all he needs. Huge victory.
Let's bring in now Alan Dershowitz, professor emeritus at Harvard Law School, the author of Get Trump. Maybe there'll be a second book where they can't get Trump because of this. Professor Dershowitz, I've been dying to talk to you about this. When this decision broke, everyone's, on the left, their heads exploded. On the right, a lot of people say, yes, this must be to the nation's highest court. Where do you stand on the fact, first, that they accepted this, and how they may rule? I'm not sure de facto is fair, as I heard one pundit say.
This is a serious case, and I don't think they will simply affirm the lower court, which went too far. And I don't think they will accept completely Trump's arguments, which went too far.
They don't have to accept, and Professor Dershowitz is absolutely brilliant in terms of the law. I don't know 1/1000th of what he does. However, I will say they don't have to affirm. They don't have to affirm everything that Trump's legal team was saying. They give him partial immunity. It's game, set, match. It's done. Okay, because Democrats don't know what's an official and unofficial act in terms of how they indicted Trump. They just indicted him. They said that he was a monster and they tried to deceive everybody, and he knew he was wrong, and his speech was unofficial because it directly correlated to criminal activity, which of course is nonsense. He literally told people to go peacefully. And so nothing he did obstructed Congress. Literally nothing that Trump did obstructed any proceeding. But of course, anything in the known universe that happens that's bad is Trump's fault. So you can't set a precedent as the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is not going to allow a precedent for future generations where a president can be imprisoned because of a speech.
I suspect they will come down with a divided decision, maybe 6-3, who knows, but a decision that splits the differences and gives Trump some immunity even after he left office for acts that were of his presidency, but will deny him immunity for actions which are primarily political. The Supreme Court did the right thing by taking the case. It's an important case, and even though it will stop these trials from occurring before the election, that these trials should not occur before the election. That really does constitute, in effect, election interference.
You've said that, yes.
The system is playing too great a role in our election. We do not want our president to be determined by prosecutors or by judges. We want them to be determined by the people.
I want you to talk about the process. This was Donald Trump's right to bring it to the Supreme Court. This was any citizen's right. This is the process that's in place from our founding fathers. But some on the left have been very critical, acting as if Nancy Pelosi tweeting, "No one's above the law." I mean, this is just where, in fact, the case goes and should go. Can you talk a little bit about some of the criticism there and explain to our viewers why that is so dangerous, I think, because this is what our nation is founded. These are the systems, these are the constructs like our Constitution.
Look, the hard left radicals, including some of my former colleagues at Harvard, Professor Lawrence Tribe and others, think the Supreme Court belongs to them. And if the Supreme Court doesn't rule the way they want it to rule, they think it shouldn't rule at all. And these were people, including me, I'm a liberal, who was an activist in the court back in the day when the Supreme Court was ruling very much in favor of the liberal rights, whether it be abortion or the right to vote or many other rights. Now that the Supreme Court is more conservative, these same scholars are saying, well, the Supreme Court should stay out of deciding these cases. It's pure hypocrisy, and you shouldn't listen to academics, and especially Harvard professors, who clearly have an agenda here and who aren't interested in a neutral approach to Supreme Court adjudication. They just want it their way.
Can't have it both ways. Professor Alan Dershowitz, as always, a pleasure to have you, sir. Thank you so much for being.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's pretty clear cut. I mean, this month is very similar to November. I mean, this month, the next couple of months, will be basically a celebration. November is going to be a huge, huge victory for Trump. There's no way, in my view, that Democrats can win. Okay, there's no way that Biden or Hillary Clinton, who replaces mashed potato brains, or anyone else, they say they're talking about other people. I don't think anybody but Hillary Clinton would be able to take over the reins. I've been saying for a long time that they're probably going to they're going to need to replace mashed potato brains. But yeah, anyway, the point is Trump has this victory. Okay, there's nothing they can do. The country is tired of Biden. They're tired of Democrats. They're tired of an abysmal, terrible foreign policy, catastrophe in terms of domestic policy, an economy on the brink of a stock market collapse. We are on the brink of a crypto and stock market crash, commercial real estate crash. We can go on forever, okay? But this is going to be every single day a huge victory in terms of the Supreme Court. Hit subscribe to this channel. And here's why. You can look, just listen to Samuel Alito right here. Listen to Samuel Alito right here. This is exactly why. We're going to get a huge victory on immunity. When they get the guilty verdict to overturn, they'll overturn the guilty verdict. It's just going to be a series of victories. That's why, I'm harping on these victories, ladies and gentlemen, because it's reality. The reality is the Supreme Court overturned the Colorado ban. They'll give Trump immunity. They'll overturn the guilty verdict. Trump will become victorious. And almost certainly they'll replace mashed potato. So pretty much everything that I've been saying, and unfortunately, God forbid, and unfortunately, because of Biden's energy policies and because Democrats and bureaucrats and people who shall remain nameless pushed to shut down economic activity years back, we're going to have, unfortunately, a devastating market crash. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I think that a market crash, stock market, crypto, Bitcoin, I think it's on the horizon, unfortunately. It's all directly linked to Democrats. I've been saying this for years. But this is Samuel Alito explaining why the prosecution against Trump is so unconstitutional.
Have to make a lot of tough decisions. The presidents have to make a lot of tough decisions about enforcing the law, and they have to make decisions about questions that are unsettled, and they have to make decisions based on the information that's available. Did I understand you to say, well, if he makes a mistake, he makes a mistake. He's subject to the criminal laws just like anybody else? You don't think he's in a peculiarly precarious position?
He's in a special position for a number of reasons. One is that he has access to legal advice about everything that he does. He's under a constitutional obligation to
and they would indict any attorney general that backed Trump. So that's not even an argument. That's not a rebuttal. They say, well, he has legal advice from his attorney general. He knows he shouldn't break the law. And then if he gets legal advice that a future Democratic Party administration disagrees with, they'll also indict the people that gave him the legal advice. It's pretty obvious what's going on.
Supposed to be faithful to the laws of the United States and the Constitution of the United States. And making a mistake is not what lands you in a criminal prosecution. There's been some talk about the statutes that are issued in this case. I think they are fairly described as malum in se statutes, engaging in conspiracies to defraud the United States with respect to one of the most important functions.
Defraud how? Defraud how? How many people had testified before Congress, before judges? How many state or county or local officials were testified under oath during cross-examination from Trump's lawyers? How about none? Zero. Not one person. Not one person, from what I understand, testified before Congress or before any judge. Definitely nobody testified before Congress. So you had the Mueller probe where you had all of these, you had maybe state, I don't believe it was a court of law. You had county level testimony. But, and then anyone who backed Trump was eviscerated by media. Saturday Night Live did a whole skit just disparaging a woman. See, again, they jettison their belief system within a second if it benefits them politically. A woman backed Trump, said that she saw foul play, and of course, Saturday Night Live does a whole skit to try to demean her. It's an entire game. It's a public relations game. Democrats govern through media and public relations. And their reality is shaped by, oh, well, all the cool people, everyone is saying this, so it must be true. Trump did not get a Mueller probe investigation. He really didn't get any investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, by any state-level officials. There was no actual investigation where people were testified and were under cross-examination by Trump's lawyers. That is 100% true. So how can you say he defrauded anyone?
Namely the certification of the next president?
Well, I don't want to dispute that particular application of 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States, to the particular facts here. But would you not agree that that is a peculiarly open-ended statutory prohibition, in that fraud under that provision, unlike under most other fraud provisions, doesn't require any impairment of a property interest?
It's designed to protect the functions of the United States government, and it's difficult to think of a more critical function than the certification of who won the election.
Yeah, I'm not, as I said, I'm not discussing the particular facts of this case, but it applies to any fraud that interferes seriously with any government operation, right?
So what the government needs to show is an intent to impede, interfere, or defeat a lawful government function by deception, and it has to be done with scienter. These are not the kinds of acts.
Trump's goal that day, and he shouldn't have had the day, it was a miscalculation by former President Trump. He should have realized that nothing he did was going to be easy. They were going to try to destroy anything they tried to do. But nothing he did was based on deception. He had a whole bunch of facts. He had every reason to be suspicious. Let's put it that way. And you were never going to get, within a 2 to 3 week span, categorical proof. They spent 2 years investigating, litigating the absurd allegation that Trump was an operative of the Kremlin. They still believe it, despite despite zero evidence showing he was an actual operative of the Kremlin. They believe in complete nonsense. They make up the nonsense with a Steele dossier where they get an FEC fine. And then they convict Trump on FEC crimes, which is hilarious, but which will be overturned by the Supreme Court. A state cannot level a federal charge against anyone without the federal government involved. But there was no FEC statute, and former FEC chairmen have stated he could have paid with his own money. It wouldn't have been a crime. That's why the FEC dropped the case. But anyway, it's so funny how all of these indictments are written through the lenses, through the prism, through the vantage point of liberal sensibilities. Well, of course, he tried to impede a hallowed process. And they say that the transfer of power was impeded. It's the first time ever with Trump. It's like, no. President Obama investigated an incoming Republican. That's never happened before. That was the greatest example of the peaceful transfer of power being impeded. Okay, we can go on forever. I mean, the hypocrisy is unbelievable.
Activities that I think any of us would think a president needs to engage in order to fulfill his Article 2 duties. And particularly in a case like this one, I want to pick up on something that the court said earlier about the distinction between a public official acting to achieve public ends and a public official acting to achieve private ends. As applied to this case, the president has no functions with respect to the certification of the winner of the presidential election. It seems likely that the framers designed the Constitution that way because at the time of the founding, presidents had no two-term limit. They could run again and again, and were expected potentially to want to do that. So the potential for self-interest would explain why the states conduct the elections. They send electors to certify who won those elections and to provide votes, and then Congress in a extraordinary joint session certifies the vote. And the president doesn't have an official role in that proceeding. So it's difficult for me to understand how there could be a serious constitutional question about saying you can't use fraud to defeat that function. You can't obstruct it through deception. You can't deprive millions of voters.
He didn't deprive anyone. We suffered through 4 years of mashed potato brains. The whole country has descended into madness in terms of foreign policy. It's an absolute unmitigated catastrophe. The world is descending into flames because we have a terrible foreign policy. Domestic policy, you see what's taking place. You know, we can't talk about it on this platform, but you have the most vulnerable in society being their lives of... You have atrocities taking place, okay, committed by criminals who have no legal right to even to have committed those crimes. We'll leave it at that. Well, obviously, a criminal has no right to commit crimes. We'll just speak in algorithmically friendly terms. You have atrocities taking place almost every day, linked directly to Democratic Party domestic policy. Okay, there's a reason that every country in the world has a functioning border, to make sure that people who didn't commit crimes in the places of their birth don't just simply get a free pass to enter. And so that is a huge, huge national security issue. We'll leave it at that. I'm speaking in vague, broad, algorithmically friendly terms. But this is an unmitigated disaster. And you see these things taking place in the news, and it's like the rebuttal is such an absurd rebuttal from Democrats. Well, you know, we can go on forever. I can go on forever. It's a catastrophe. So Trump didn't stop anything. The people who committed crimes that day committed crimes. Had nothing to do with Trump. People were let into the building by law enforcement. We saw that from the Carlson footage. So it's like, what do you want? They make absurd leaps of logic, and they say, well, because people committed crimes, that is a concerted effort by Trump, and his speech told people to commit crimes. None of that is true. None of that is true, which is why he's going to get partial immunity.
Of their right to have their vote counted for the candidate who they chose.
Thank you, Counsel. Justice Thomas? Justice Alito?
Could we just briefly review the layers of protection that you think exists? And I'm going to start with what the D.C. Circuit said. So the first layer of protection is that attorneys general and other Justice Department attorneys can be trusted to act in a professional and ethical manner, right?
Yes.
How robust is that protection? I mean, most of the vast majority of attorneys general and Justice Department attorneys, and we both served in the Justice Department for a long time, are honorable people, and they take their professional ethical responsibilities seriously. But there have been exceptions, right? Both among attorneys general and among federal prosecutors.
There have been rare exceptions, Justice Alito, but when we're talking about layers of protection, I do think this is the starting point. And if the court has concerns about the robustness of it, I would suggest looking at the charges in this case.
Well, I want to talk about this in the abstract, because what is before us, of course, does involve this particular case, which is immensely important. But whatever we decide is going to apply to all future presidents. So as for attorneys general, there have been two who were convicted of criminal offenses while in office. There were others. A. Mitchell Palmer's one that comes to mind, who is widely regarded as having abused the power of his office. Would you agree with that?
I would, but they are two officials in a long line of attorneys generals who did not, and in departments of justice that are staffed by multiple people who do adhere to their office. And Justice Alito, if I could the point that I wanted to make about this case does go to the general proposition. The allegations about the misuse of the Department of Justice to perpetuate election fraud show exactly how the Department of Justice functions in the way that it is supposed to. Petitioner is alleged to have tried to get the Department of Justice to send fraudulent letters to the states to get them to reverse electoral results.
This is, of course, not true. There were investigations ongoing. And so when you... Anyway, we can go on forever. None of this is actually... let's just say everything that the counsel is stating is missing context.
Yeah, I understand that, Mr. Dreeben, but as I said, this case will have effects that go far beyond this particular prosecution. So moving on to the second level of protection that the D.C. Circuit cited, federal grand juries will shield former presidents.
Made that decision
that something is lawful. Is that an absolute
versus linear, that the right have been made specific so that there is notice to the president? I don't think that would have been satisfied.
All right, well, we could go through other historical examples. I won't do that. Let me just touch briefly on a couple of other things. One is the relevance of advice of counsel, and I wasn't clear what your answer is. So if the president gets advice from the attorney general that something is lawful, is that an absolute defense?
Yes, I think that it is under the principle of entrapment by a...
They're only saying that because Bill Barr did not back Trump. Trump did not have the ability to actually investigate. There were no true investigations. We'll leave it at that. There might have been recounts, but there were no true investigations of bizarre anomalies that took place. Nobody testified before Congress. Nobody faced cross-examination by Trump's lawyers under oath. End of story. Not the case with the Mueller probe. The Mueller probe, if anything, found nothing with Trump and then indicted people on process crimes. You didn't even have that with the claims Trump made. Anyway, hit subscribe to this channel, people. I'll be back tomorrow. It's a done deal. He got a huge victory on immunity. It's just a matter of now of the Supreme Court issuing the statement. And he'll get that huge, amazing, historic victory, overturning an unconstitutional guilty verdict. Hey, and if it happens before the Supreme Court and the lower courts, I'll be just as happy. I'll claim just as much victory with that. Hit subscribe. Thanks, everybody, for growing this channel, and thank you for your support everywhere around the world, in the Philippines, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. Thank you so very much. Nigeria, Korea, everyone watching.